Imagine settling into your first-class seat, a sanctuary of luxury, only to be told you don't belong. Not because you're in the wrong place, but because you're the wrong person. This is the chilling reality for Ethan Blackwood, a visionary tech CEO whose journey of quiet success is violently disrupted by petty prejudice and a brazen bribe from an entitled passenger. What unfolds in the pristine cabin isn't just a seating dispute. It's a raw, public act of discrimination, meticulously captured on camera. The unsuspecting airline staff have no idea they're humiliating the very man who holds their company's fate in his hands. Brace yourself for a story where karma arrives with its own first-class ticket, delivering an unforgettable lesson in justice and unexpected reckoning. The hum of the aircraft was usually a soothing symphony for Ethan Blackwood. At 38, he was the visionary founder and CEO of InnovateAI Solutions, a tech behemoth valued at over $3 billion, specializing in ethical AI for customer service. His software was designed to detect and dismantle bias in digital interactions, a stark irony considering the deeply human prejudice he was about to face. This first-class cabin, a sanctuary of plush leather and whispered luxury, was where Ethan often found his clearest thoughts, the solitude of the skies a perfect backdrop for innovation. He'd meticulously chosen Skylux Airlines, known for its opulent service and the promise of serene travel, particularly the coveted seat 2A with its unmatched legroom, allowing him to work on his keynote speech for the Global Ethics and Technology Conference. "There seems to be a slight misunderstanding, sir. We need you to relocate to accommodate a very important passenger." Chloe Davies, the flight attendant, offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, her tone dripping with a practiced condescension that grated on the serene atmosphere. "This particular seat, 2A, is exclusively reserved for our most frequent platinum members. You don't quite fit the profile for it." Behind her, a woman of impeccable, if somewhat rigid elegance tapped her designer watch impatiently. Eleanor Vance, probably in her mid-50s, was a vision in a tailored cream suit, her eyes already dismissively scanning Ethan from his designer sneakers to his custom-tailored suit. "I always sit there," Eleanor muttered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, her voice a low purr of entitlement. "It's practically my seat on this route." Ethan looked up from his tablet, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before settling into an expression of calm resolve. He had done everything right, booked months in advance, paid for his platinum membership in full, arrived punctually. He was a platinum member. Yet here he was, being subtly but undeniably told he didn't belong. He calmly reached for his wallet, extracting the sleek, metallic sheen of his Skylux Platinum member card. "I am a Platinum member," Ethan replied, his voice even, betraying no emotion. "And this is my assigned seat." Chloe's smile tightened, a micro-expression of surprise flitting across her features before a determined mask reappeared. "I understand, sir," she insisted, her gaze darting to Eleanor, "but this specific seat is typically reserved for a more regular platinum member who flies with us quite frequently." The implication hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken prejudice. Regardless of his actual status, Ethan, a black man, was being deemed less worthy of the seat than the white woman who desired it. Passengers, already settling into their seats, began to stir. Whispers rippled through the cabin like a spreading tide. Phones, discreetly at first, then more openly, began to emerge from pockets and bags, their cameras quietly engaging. What Chloe and Eleanor, and the entire Skylux crew, didn't know was that this seemingly insignificant act of discrimination, born of petty entitlement and casual bias, was about to ignite a firestorm. The man they were attempting to humiliate held not just the fate of their jobs, but the very existence of their multi-billion-dollar airline in his hands. This was a story where karma wasn't just arriving, it was arriving with its own first-class ticket, and it was about to board. Ethan Blackwood's journey had begun not in the gleaming towers of corporate America, but amidst the gritty realities of South Chicago. By the age of 11, while other children were captivated by video games, Ethan was building them, teaching himself to code on a beat-up second-hand computer. These simple programs evolved into complex algorithms, laying the groundwork for his future empire. His path was etched with adversity. When Ethan was 16, a senseless act of violence claimed his father, shaking their community to its core. Standing at his father's grave, young Ethan made a silent vow that would define his life: to build a world where people saw each other as human beings, first and foremost. That promise became the crucible that forged 2 decades of relentless work. InnovateAI Solutions, birthed in a tiny apartment where Ethan coded for 18 hours a day, sustained by odd jobs to pay rent, was the fulfillment of that sacred pledge. Earlier that day, airport security cameras had captured a glimpse of the true Ethan. He'd patiently helped an elderly woman struggling with her luggage, guiding her to her gate. He held doors open for strangers, thanked every service worker by name, and tipped generously at the airport cafe. Not because he was being observed, but because that was simply who Ethan Blackwood was. Humble despite his extraordinary success, kind despite his immense power. Now, he was traveling to deliver the keynote address at a conference focused on the very ethics of technology, a topic he embodied. As Ethan settled back into his chosen seat, the luxury of Skylux, where first-class tickets often cost more than some people's monthly rent, seemed a cruel joke. Skylux boasted heated towels, champagne service, and full lie-flat beds. Yet beneath this polished exterior, the airline was faltering. Their booking systems were archaic, customer service ratings had plummeted, and they desperately needed a major tech partnership to revitalize their operations. What the Skylux crew, absorbed in their petty drama, failed to grasp was that the CEO of the very company that held their future in its digital palm was sitting in seat 2A. Chloe Davies, 8 years into her career with Skylux, prided herself on her intimate knowledge of first-class regulars. She knew Eleanor Vance's preferences down to the specific brand of sparkling water. Ensuring Eleanor got seat 2A wasn't just a service. It was a finely tuned routine that ensured her monthly mortgage was met, thanks to Eleanor's reliably generous tips. "Sir, we have a platinum member who always sits in this particular seat," Chloe reiterated, leaning closer to Ethan. Her voice polite but edged with an expectation of unquestioning compliance. "Would you mind moving to another first-class seat?" Ethan, his tablet momentarily forgotten, displayed his boarding pass once more. "I'm sorry, but this is my assigned seat," he calmly explained. "I'm also a platinum member." Eleanor Vance, still standing in the aisle, made no attempt to disguise her escalating irritation. "I always sit there on this route. It's practically my seat," she declared, her voice carrying across the hushed cabin. The situation, simmering beneath the surface, was now boiling over. Several passengers were openly observing, some with expressions of discomfort, others with growing curiosity. Chloe shifted nervously from foot to foot, her gaze flickering between Ethan and Eleanor. "Sir, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in another section," she suggested, her implication chillingly clear. She wasn't offering him another first-class seat. Ethan, however, remained a picture of composure. "No, thank you," he replied firmly. "I specifically selected this seat for the legroom. I need to work during the flight." Chloe's forced smile withered. She nodded curtly and retreated towards the front of the cabin, casting anxious glances back at Ethan. What transpired next was silently, but perfectly, captured on a passenger's phone across the aisle. Eleanor stepped forward, feigning an adjustment to her overhead bag. With a practiced sleight of hand, she slipped a folded stack of bills into Chloe's pocket. "I appreciate your help with this situation," Eleanor whispered, just loud enough for the nearby recorders to pick up. Chloe's face flushed as she accepted the money. In that precise moment, a routine seating dispute transmuted into something far more insidious. A blatant transaction for discrimination. A bribe to remove a passenger based on appearance. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin curdled. Brendan Walsh, the cabin supervisor, approached Ethan's seat with the swagger of someone accustomed to unquestioned authority. His posture was rigid, his expression fixed in what he clearly believed was unwavering professionalism. "Sir, we need you to move to accommodate our VIP passenger," Brendan announced, his voice carrying command rather than request. Ethan looked up, his expression still calm, but his eyes now held a weary familiarity with such encounters. "I've shown my boarding pass and platinum status," he stated evenly. "This is my assigned seat." Brendan's face tightened, a muscle twitching near his jaw. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a condescending murmur that made several nearby passengers shift uncomfortably. "Perhaps you're unfamiliar with how things operate on this airline," Brendan said, each word emphasized as if speaking to a recalcitrant child. "We accommodate worthy customers who have specific preferences." By now, the confrontation had become a full-blown spectacle. A sharp-suited businesswoman across the aisle discreetly angled her phone, openly recording the escalating drama. Within hours, these videos would explode across the internet, racking up millions of views. Eleanor remained in the aisle, clutching her designer handbag, her impatience becoming increasingly theatrical. She checked her watch with an exaggerated flourish, then emitted a loud, performative sigh. "I have an important meeting right after landing," she announced to no one in particular. "I need my usual seat. This is beyond ridiculous." The other passengers' expressions, a mix of discomfort and indignation, told the true story. "He doesn't even look like someone that can afford it anyway," a voice, likely Eleanor's companion, mumbled from behind her. "You should get out of the seat." Brendan, emboldened by Eleanor's performance, leaned even closer to Ethan, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Yet, in the tense quiet of the cabin, his words were still audible to those straining to hear. "Sir, we can do this the easy way, or we can make this difficult. Your choice." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air, a silent ultimatum. A moment stretched into seconds as passengers held their breath, awaiting Ethan's response. Many would have yielded at this point, buckling under the pressure of public confrontation, the implicit threat, the sheer desire to avoid further escalation. But Ethan Blackwood was not most people. His composure never wavered. He looked Brendan directly in the eyes. "I'm not moving," he stated firmly. "This is my seat." 6 simple words, delivered without anger or aggression, but with absolute, unshakable certainty. Brendan's face flushed crimson. This was not going according to plan. He straightened up, adjusted his uniform tie with a jerky movement, and without another word strode briskly toward the front of the cabin. He picked up the service phone, his back to the passengers, but his agitated gestures visible to all. The lines had been drawn. What should have been a routine flight was about to become something none of the people involved would ever forget. The tension in the cabin was palpable as Brendan spoke urgently into the service phone. Passengers exchanged glances, some typing furiously on their phones, others watching with undisguised interest. Ethan had returned to reviewing his presentation, his calm exterior revealing nothing of what must have been churning within him. 5 minutes crawled by before the cockpit door opened. Captain David Miller emerged, his weathered face set in a professional mask, following Brendan down the aisle. Chloe trailed behind them, visibly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. The captain's appearance signaled to everyone that this had moved beyond a simple seating dispute. This was now an official intervention. Captain Miller stopped beside Ethan's seat, towering above the seated passenger. His voice carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Sir, I understand there's a situation," the captain began, his tone measured but firm. "My crew has the authority to assign seats as needed for the comfort and convenience of all passengers." Ethan looked up at the 3 airline employees now standing over him. The power dynamic wasn't subtle. 3 standing, 1 seated. Yet Ethan's composure never wavered. "Captain, with all due respect," Ethan replied, his voice steady, "I have a confirmed seat assignment and platinum status. I selected this specific seat for the legroom I need to work during the flight. There's no policy that requires me to give up my assigned seat to another passenger who simply prefers it." Brendan's lips curled into what could only be described as a smirk, the expression of someone who believed they held all the cards. "Sir, if you continue to be uncooperative," Brendan interjected, "we'll have no choice but to remove you from the flight." The threat landed like a physical blow. Ethan's eyebrows raised slightly, the first sign of genuine surprise he'd shown throughout the confrontation. "Are you threatening to remove me because I won't give up the seat I paid for?" he asked, his voice reflecting disbelief. The question hung in the air, its implications impossible to ignore. What possible justification could there be for removing a passenger who was simply occupying his assigned seat? Before the captain could respond, Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, her voice rising dramatically. "I'm going to miss my connection. I have never been treated this poorly in all my years of flying." The irony of her complaint wasn't lost on the other passengers, several of whom exchanged looks of disbelief. Captain Miller, perhaps sensing the situation was spiraling beyond what he'd anticipated, adopted a more authoritative stance. "This is your final warning," he stated firmly. "Move to another seat or we'll call security." It was at this moment that Ethan reached slowly into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone. With deliberate movements, he opened his camera app and began recording. "I want to be clear about what's happening here," Ethan said calmly, his phone capturing the scene. "I'm being threatened with removal from this flight because I won't give up my assigned seat to another passenger who wants it." Brendan's face contorted with anger. He reached for Ethan's phone, his composure completely abandoned. "Recording is not permitted," he snapped, his hand dangerously close to grabbing Ethan's property. Ethan pulled his phone back, just out of reach. "Actually, there's no federal law prohibiting recording on an aircraft unless it interferes with crew duties," Ethan countered, his voice betraying a hint of dry amusement. "I'm simply documenting this interaction for my own protection." The unexpected legal knowledge caught Brendan off guard. He withdrew his hand, but his expression darkened further. The next sound that echoed through the cabin was the heavy footsteps of 2 airport security officers boarding the plane. Their arrival marked a point of no return. The officers moved with practiced efficiency down the aisle, following Brendan's gesturing hand directly to Ethan's seat. The cabin had fallen completely silent. Even the ambient sounds of the aircraft seemed to have faded away as all attention focused on the confrontation. Ethan remained seated, his posture straight, his expression composed despite the humiliation being inflicted upon him. His phone continued recording from where he had placed it on his lap. "Sir," the first security officer began, his voice flat, "we've been informed there's a situation requiring your removal from the aircraft." Ethan nodded once, acknowledging the officer's presence while maintaining his dignity. "I'd like to understand the specific airline policy I'm violating," he requested, his voice clear and measured. "I'm sitting in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass and platinum status." The security officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was becoming increasingly obvious they had been called to remove a passenger who had violated no rules. "Sir, you need to gather your belongings and come with us," the second officer stated, avoiding the question entirely. Ethan looked directly at Captain Miller, who stood several feet away, flanked by Brendan and Chloe. Am I being removed for refusing to give my correctly assigned seat to another passenger? Ethan asked directly, his question cutting through the pretense. You're being removed for creating a disturbance, the captain replied, the words sounding hollow even as he spoke them. A murmur ran through the cabin. An elderly gentleman in the second row shook his head in confirmation, while a young woman near the back of first class quietly wiped tears from her eyes. With quiet dignity, Ethan began gathering his belongings. He closed his tablet case, tucked his presentation notes into his briefcase, and stood slowly. Eleanor, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, made no attempt to hide her satisfaction. A smug smile played at the corners of her mouth as she watched Ethan being escorted from his seat. Her seat now, she believed. Serves him right. He clearly doesn't belong, came a harsh whisper from somewhere in the cabin. But he didn't do anything wrong, called another passenger. I'm recording all of this, announced a third. But despite the comments, Ethan was being removed. He walked with his head held high, his back straight, his eyes forward, the posture of a man who had faced injustice before and knew how to maintain his integrity in its face. As he passed by the row where Brendan stood, supervising the removal, something happened that would later become a key piece of evidence. Eleanor, thinking herself unobserved, slipped another folded bill into Brendan's pocket. Thanks for handling that situation, she whispered, her voice just loud enough to be captured by several passengers recording phones. First class should have standards. The implication of her words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. As Ethan stepped off the plane, escorted by security, he pulled out his phone once more. His fingers moved quickly across the screen as he composed a text message to his COO, Anya Sharma. I was removed from the plane. They picked the wrong person to humiliate. While most people would be flustered, embarrassed, or enraged after such an experience, Ethan exhibited the controlled composure of someone who had navigated these waters before. Anya, it's Ethan. I need you to assemble the legal team immediately. He spoke into his phone, his voice low but firm. I've just been removed from a Skylux flight in what appears to be a textbook case of discriminatory treatment. The security officers who had escorted him off the plane lingered nearby, their initial certainty dissolving into uncomfortable realization. One officer was reviewing the incident report on his tablet, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he scrolled through the details. Sir, the officer finally said, approaching Ethan hesitantly, I believe there may have been a misunderstanding. The report indicates you were being disruptive, but the witness statements don't corroborate that. Ethan lowered his phone for a moment, his gaze steady as he addressed the officer. There was indeed a misunderstanding, he replied, but not on my part. I was sitting in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass when I was asked to move to accommodate another passenger's preference. When I declined, I was forcibly removed. The officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner, who was already backing away from the situation. They both knew they had been used to enforce something that had nothing to do with security or safety protocols. We apologize for the inconvenience, sir, the officer offered weakly before following his partner in a hasty retreat. Ethan immediately returned to documenting the incident, recording a detailed voice memo recounting every interaction, every word spoken, every nuance of body language he had observed. As he spoke into his phone, a young woman approached hesitantly. She was clutching her carry-on bag in one hand and her phone in the other. Ethan recognized her immediately. She had been seated across the aisle from him in first class. Excuse me, sir, she said, her voice tinged with indignation on his behalf. I followed you off the plane because I couldn't just sit there and be part of what was happening. I recorded everything, From the moment that flight attendant first approached you until they forced you off the plane. She held up her phone, showing Ethan the video. Clear, unobstructed footage that captured not only his removal, but also the damning moment when Eleanor slipped money to Brendan. This was clearly discrimination, the woman continued, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. You should have this. Ethan's expression softened for the first time since the ordeal began. Thank you, he said with genuine gratitude. This may be very helpful. They exchanged contact information, the woman promising to send him the full unedited video immediately and to testify if needed. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that her video would soon be seen by millions. Meanwhile, back on the aircraft, a very different scene was unfolding. Eleanor Vance had settled comfortably into Ethan's seat, her smug satisfaction barely concealed, as Chloe delivered a complimentary glass of champagne. I'm so sorry for the disruption, Miss Vance, Chloe offered deferentially. We want to ensure the rest of your flight is perfect. In the galley, out of passengers' sight, Brendan and Chloe exchanged knowing looks as Brendan discreetly counted the folded bills Eleanor had slipped him. 200, he murmured, tucking the money into his wallet. Some passengers understand how to show proper appreciation. Neither of them realized that this petty bonus would soon cost them far more than they could possibly imagine. Suddenly, an urgent call came through to the crew for an emergency meeting. The voice on the other end was one of the airline's senior administrators, her tone grim. They had just made a grave mistake that could cost them their jobs, and perhaps more. The atmosphere had shifted, as clearly they were no longer in control. A chill settled over Chloe, Brendan, and Captain Miller as they looked at each other, a creeping dread beginning to bloom. Who exactly was the man they had removed from that VIP seat and kicked off the plane? On the top floor of the sleek, glass-walled headquarters of Skylux Airlines, Robert Maxwell, the CEO, was reviewing quarterly projections when his phone rang with an internal call from the Public Relations Department. Sir, we may have a serious situation developing. The PR director's voice carried an unmistakable edge of panic. A video is going viral, showing one of our passengers being removed from a flight this morning. Maxwell sighed, initially dismissive. Passengers get removed for disruptive behavior every day, Janet. Handle it with the usual statement. Sir, this is different, the PR director insisted, her voice tight with urgency. The passenger was not disruptive. He was a black man in first class who refused to give up his assigned seat to a white woman. The video clearly shows our staff accepting cash from the woman before and after his removal. The blood drained from Maxwell's face as he processed the implications. Send me the video now. As Maxwell watched the footage on his monitor, his expression shifted from concern to horror. The clear discrimination, the money changing hands, the dignified composure of the man being removed. It was a PR catastrophe unfolding in real time. Who is he? Maxwell demanded, his voice strained. Have we identified the passenger? There was a moment of hesitation before the PR director responded. Yes, sir. According to the manifest, his name is Ethan Blackwood. The silence that followed was deafening. Did you say Ethan Blackwood? Maxwell finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, sir. Does that name mean something to you? Maxwell collapsed back into his chair, staring blankly at the ceiling, his mind reeling. Ethan Blackwood, he repeated, is the founder and CEO of InnovateAI Solutions, the same company we've been courting for a $50 million partnership, the same company that has been quietly buying our stock for the past 2 years. Miles away in a private airport lounge, Ethan sat at the center of a rapidly assembling team. His COO, Anya Sharma, had arrived within 20 minutes of his text, bringing with her their chief legal counsel and head of corporate communications. Laptops were open, phones were buzzing. and the atmosphere crackled with focused energy. "The video has already reached 2 million views," the communications director reported, turning her screen to show the rapidly climbing numbers. "Major news outlets are picking it up now." Anya and Ethan exchanged a significant look, one that spoke of years of shared experiences and mutual understanding. "They don't know that we were already evaluating their company culture for the partnership," Anya said, her tone reflecting the bitter irony of the situation. "I guess they just gave us their authentic selves, without realizing who was watching." In the Skylux headquarters, the social media team was in full crisis mode. Screens displayed the rapidly spiraling situation. Skylux discrimination was trending nationally. The video view count had passed 5 million, and celebrities were beginning to amplify the story to their millions of followers. Maxwell was now surrounded by his executive team, their faces grim as they assessed the damage. "Sir," his assistant interrupted, phone in hand, "Mr. Blackwood's office is on the line. They're requesting to speak with you directly." The room fell silent. Maxwell took a deep breath before accepting the call on speakerphone. "Mr. Blackwood," he began, his voice strained with forced cordiality, "I want to extend our deepest apologies for the inexcusable incident that occurred this morning." "Wait," interrupted the CFO, who had been frantically searching through files. "The Ethan Blackwood? The tech CEO?" Maxwell nodded grimly as Ethan's voice came through the speaker, calm and measured. "Mr. Maxwell, I appreciate your willingness to speak with me directly. As you may be aware, my company owns approximately 25% of Skylux Airline shares, a controlling stake when combined with our strategic partners." The executives exchanged panicked glances, the full magnitude of the situation finally dawning on them. "I want to call an emergency shareholder meeting immediately," Ethan continued, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "The events of today have raised serious concerns about Skylux corporate culture and commitment to ethical treatment of all passengers." An emergency board meeting had been convened with unprecedented urgency. Board members had dropped everything to attend, some still in golf attire, others having clearly rushed from family events. The tension in the room was suffocating as they waited for the arrival of the man who now held their fate in his hands. When Ethan Blackwood finally entered, the effect was immediate and electric. Conversation ceased mid-sentence. Every head turned. Despite everything he had experienced that day, Ethan carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was worth. He wore the same suit he'd been wearing when removed from the plane, a subtle but powerful reminder of the day's events. Behind him walked his executive team, Anya Sharma, their legal counsel, and 2 others whose presence would later prove crucial to the transformation that was about to begin. As Ethan took his seat, Maxwell used a remote to dim the lights and activate the massive screen at the front of the room. The video began to play, crystal clear and devastating in its implications. Every moment was captured. The initial confrontation, Brendan's condescension, the captain's weak justifications, and most damning of all, the money changing hands before and after Ethan's removal. When the footage ended, the room remained silent for a full 30 seconds. Several board members couldn't maintain eye contact with Ethan. Maxwell cleared his throat, his face ashen, as he turned to address Ethan directly. "Mr. Blackwood, we want to express our deepest apologies for the inexcusable treatment you experienced today. This behavior does not reflect the values of Skylux Airlines, and we—" "I'm not interested in apologies," Ethan interrupted, his voice calm but resolute. The bluntness of his response sent a visible ripple through the room. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, suddenly aware that standard corporate damage control would not suffice. "As your largest individual shareholder," Ethan continued, "I have one demand and one decision. First, every staff member involved is terminated immediately. Second, I am canceling the proposed contract between my tech company and this airline." Maxwell glanced nervously at the board members before responding. "Mr. Blackwood, while we understand your frustration, perhaps we could consider suspensions instead. Some of these employees have been with the company for many years, and our union agreements—" "This isn't negotiable," Ethan stated, placing his hands flat on the table. "It's accountability, or I'll pull my investment in the $50 million contract we were considering." The implications hung heavy in the air. 25% of their stock suddenly dumped on the market would be catastrophic. The loss of the $50 million modernization contract would leave them years behind their competitors. As if on cue, the boardroom doors burst open. A young financial analyst rushed in, clearly having run from another floor. He thrust a tablet toward Maxwell, forgetting all protocols of boardroom etiquette in his urgency. "Sir, news of the incident is already affecting our stock price," he announced breathlessly. "We're down 12% and falling. Market analysts are predicting a possible 30% drop by closing if we don't take decisive action." Maxwell looked from the tablet to Ethan and back again, the reality of his situation becoming painfully clear. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about the very survival of the airline. The airline would go down without Ethan, because all other investors would pull out their shares too if he left, making them bankrupt. The very man they removed from the plane now held the fate of the airline in his hands. 3 floors below the boardroom, in a sterile conference room devoid of luxury, Brendan, Chloe, and Captain Miller sat in uncomfortable silence. They had been summoned without explanation, though the growing whispers throughout the company had given them reason for concern. The HR director entered promptly at 4:30 p.m., accompanied by the company's legal counsel and 2 security officers who positioned themselves discreetly by the door. The presence of security wasn't standard procedure for performance reviews or even disciplinary meetings. It signaled something far more serious. "I'll be direct," the HR director began, placing 3 identical folders on the table. "Your employment with Skylux Airlines is terminated, effective immediately." The statement landed like a physical blow. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Brendan's face contorted with indignation. Captain Miller simply closed his eyes, his weathered face suddenly looking decades older. "We are sorry." Brendan was the first to recover, his voice rising with each word. "We were just following procedure. That passenger was being difficult and disrupting the boarding process." The HR director's expression remained impassive as she opened her laptop and turned it toward them. The now viral video began to play. Brendan's condescension perfectly captured, Chloe's discomfort evident, the captain's abdication of responsibility clear for all to see. But it was what happened next that drained the color from Brendan's face. The footage clearly showed Eleanor slipping money into his pocket. Her words about maintaining standards audible, despite her attempt to speak quietly. Was accepting money from a passenger to discriminate against another passenger procedure? The HR director asked, her tone making it clear there was no acceptable answer. Chloe broke down, tears streaming down her face. "We made a terrible mistake," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew it was wrong, even as it was happening, but I didn't stop it." Captain Miller, a man who had navigated through literal storms during his career, seemed unable to weather this one. "I was just trusting my crew's assessment," he offered weakly. "I didn't personally witness the initial confrontation." "You all failed in your responsibility today," the HR director stated firmly. "Not just to the company, but to basic human decency. The passenger you removed was Ethan Blackwood, CEO of InnovateAI Solutions and our largest individual shareholder." The revelation hit them like a second blow. Chloe's crying intensified. Brendan's face, previously flushed with anger, now drained completely of color. "You will be escorted to collect your personal belongings and then to the exit," the HR director continued. "Your final pay will include 2 weeks severance, which is more than generous given the circumstances." As they were led from the room, the 3 former employees experienced what Ethan had felt earlier that day: the humiliation of being escorted out while others watched. The symmetry was both perfect and devastating. Meanwhile, in the main auditorium of Skylux headquarters, hundreds of employees had gathered for an unprecedented announcement. CEO Robert Maxwell stood on stage, flanked by Ethan Blackwood and his team. "Today, Skylux Airlines failed one of our passengers in the most fundamental way," Maxwell began, his voice carrying through the hushed room. "This failure wasn't just an isolated incident. It was symptomatic of systemic issues that we must address immediately and comprehensively." He gestured to Ethan, who stepped forward to explain the path forward. "Every single employee of Skylux Airlines will undergo comprehensive bias training before returning to service," Maxwell continued, his voice firm. "This training program, developed by InnovateAI Solutions, will become a permanent part of our onboarding and continuing education." Murmurs spread through the crowd as employees recognized the magnitude of what was being announced. A company-wide training program would cost millions and disrupt operations significantly. Ethan addressed the gathered employees directly, his voice carrying the weight of both personal experience and professional authority. "This isn't just about punishing those involved," he explained. "It's about transforming your entire culture. What happened today wasn't just wrong because I happen to be a shareholder. It would have been equally wrong if I were a teacher, a doctor, or a student traveling home." The employees listened in silence, many nodding in agreement, others looking down in shared embarrassment at what had been done in their company's name. "Starting tomorrow," the CEO announced in the final powerful moment of the meeting, "Skylux Airlines will implement a company-wide grounding for mandatory training. Every flight, every route, every service will be suspended for 48 hours, while our entire staff participates in the first phase of this program." The gasps were audible throughout the auditorium. In an industry where minutes of delay cost thousands, a 48-hour complete shutdown was unprecedented. It would cost the airline millions, but the message it sent about their commitment to change was priceless. As Ethan watched from the stage, he saw the faces of the employees processing this news. Some showed resistance, others relief, but most displayed a growing recognition that this moment marked a fundamental shift in their company's identity. In the weeks that followed the incident, Skylux Airlines underwent the most comprehensive transformation in its 30-year history. Conference rooms across the country were converted into training centers. Flight schedules were modified to ensure every employee, from baggage handlers to the CEO himself, participated in the mandatory program. The training wasn't the standard corporate checkbox exercise that employees had grown accustomed to ignoring. It was immersive, challenging, and at times uncomfortable. Employees were confronted with their own biases through sophisticated simulation exercises developed by InnovateAI's team of behavioral psychologists and AI specialists. Ethan made a point of personally addressing many of these sessions, standing before rooms filled with skeptical, sometimes defensive, employees. "This is your opportunity to be part of the solution," he told them, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. "What happened to me happens to people without my resources or platform every day. Today, we begin changing that." For some, his presence was transformative, putting a human face to what management might otherwise have dismissed as a PR crisis. For others, his willingness to engage despite his treatment demonstrated a commitment to genuine change rather than retribution. Outside Skylux's corporate bubble, consequences continued to unfold. Brendan, Chloe, and Captain Miller discovered that in the digital age, accountability follows you everywhere. Their names and faces had become synonymous with discrimination in an industry where reputation is currency. Brendan sat in his apartment surrounded by rejection emails from other airlines. Previous experience noted, but we've decided to pursue other candidates at this time. The polite corporate language couldn't mask the reality. No one wanted to hire the man from that viral video. Chloe faced similar rejections, each one deepening her understanding of how a single decision could alter the trajectory of a career built over 8 years. During one interview that initially seemed promising, the hiring manager's expression changed the moment recognition dawned. "You're the flight attendant from that discrimination incident, aren't you?" The interview ended shortly after. Captain Miller, with 30 years of flying experience, found himself unable to secure even entry-level positions within the industry. His distinguished career had been reduced to those few minutes of poor judgment when he had failed to stand up for what was right. Eleanor Vance wasn't spared either. Skylux had implemented a lifetime ban, but the consequences extended far beyond her preferred airline. She sat in her living room, watching news coverage of the incident, her name and actions discussed by national commentators. Her company had placed her on administrative leave pending an investigation into her conduct. Fair weather friends had distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the woman now branded as Airline Karen across social media platforms. For perhaps the first time, she was forced to confront the real impact of her entitlement. Meanwhile, Skylux was implementing sweeping policy changes, new guidelines that established zero tolerance for discrimination, enhanced protocols for handling seating disputes, and protection for employees who reported misconduct. The employee handbook was rewritten to explicitly state that accepting gifts or payments from passengers in exchange for preferential treatment was grounds for immediate termination. Passengers began noticing differences almost immediately. Brief interviews captured at gates and baggage claims revealed a shifting perception. "The flight attendants seem more attentive to everyone now," noted one frequent flyer. "Before, it always felt like there was an invisible hierarchy based on how you looked or what you were wearing." "I actually had a problem with my seat assignment," shared another passenger. "But the way they handled it was completely professional. They found a solution that worked for everyone without making anyone feel less valued." As promised, Ethan gradually reinstated his investment as measurable changes were implemented and verified by independent auditors. Skylux's stock began to recover, though the road back would be long. The company's hiring practices underwent a complete overhaul, with diversity initiatives that went beyond superficial metrics to address fundamental issues of inclusion and representation. The transformation wasn't perfect or immediate. Genuine change never is. But with each passing week, Skylux was becoming the company it had always claimed to be in its advertisements, one where everyone truly was treated like royalty. 6 months after the incident that nearly destroyed Skylux Airlines, the company was not just surviving, it was thriving. Passenger numbers had not only recovered, but increased by 12%. Employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. The toxic culture that had festered beneath the surface for years had been exposed to the light and was finally healing. The most surprising development came on a rainy Tuesday morning when Ethan Blackwood announced a new initiative through his foundation. The Second Chance Program, designed specifically for individuals who had lost their jobs due to bias incidents. The program offered comprehensive rehabilitation, training, and a path back to employment. "Accountability doesn't mean permanent punishment," Ethan explained at the press conference launching the program. "It means earning your way back. We cannot build a more just society if we don't create pathways for those who have acknowledged their mistakes and done the work to change." Among the first participants in the program were Brendan, Chloe, and Captain Miller. The journey wasn't easy for any of them. The program required them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, to understand the impact of their actions not just on Ethan, but on countless others who experienced similar treatment without the power to fight back. Brendan, who had initially been the most resistant, underwent the most profound transformation. In group sessions, he spoke about growing up in a household where casual racism was the norm, about never questioning the biases he had inherited until they cost him everything. "I never saw myself as prejudiced," he admitted during one particularly powerful session. "I thought that because I didn't use slurs or explicitly hate anyone, I was one of the good ones. This experience has shown me how bias operates, even when we don't recognize it in ourselves." Chloe's journey focused on moral courage, the willingness to speak up even when it might cost you. "I knew what was happening was wrong," she shared, "but I was afraid of losing my job if I challenged Brendan or the captain. Now I understand that my silence made me complicit." Captain Miller, the oldest of the three, perhaps had the hardest road. Decades of believing he had treated everyone fairly were called into question by his actions that day. "I trusted the wrong things," he reflected. "I trusted hierarchy over humanity. I'll spend the rest of my career making that right." With certificates from the program in hand, Brendan and Chloe began applying for entry-level positions at different airlines. Their applications now included their story, not as an excuse, but as context for the growth they had undergone. The certificates didn't erase their past actions, but they demonstrated a commitment to change that some employers found compelling. Chloe was the first to secure a position, not as a flight attendant, but as a ground crew member at a regional carrier. The pay was less than half of what she had earned at Skylux, the hours were longer, and the work was physically demanding, but it was a second chance she had once thought impossible. Brendan followed a month later, starting in baggage handling at another airline. Captain Miller, given his age and experience, faced a different path. He wouldn't fly commercially again, but found purpose teaching in the Second Chance program, helping others understand the consequences of the kinds of decisions he had made. Skylux itself was transformed. Independent auditors confirmed what passengers had already noticed. The airline now led the industry in customer satisfaction across all demographics. For the first time, Black, Hispanic, and Middle Eastern passengers reported service experiences equal to or better than those of white passengers, a metric that should have been standard, but had never been achieved in the industry. In a private meeting at Skylux headquarters, Ethan sat across from CEO Robert Maxwell, reviewing the 6-month progress report. "You've shown real change," Ethan acknowledged, closing the folder containing the latest metrics. "That deserves recognition." Maxwell nodded, the weight of the previous months evident in the new lines on his face. "This hasn't been easy," he admitted, "but it's been necessary." "What happened to you that day forced us to confront issues we'd been ignoring for years." "That's often how change happens," Ethan replied. "Not through comfort, but through confrontation." The two men stood and shook hands, no longer adversaries, not quite friends, but partners in a transformation that was changing not just one airline, but setting a new standard for an entire industry. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about progress. Have you ever faced such blatant injustice simply because of how you looked or where someone else thought you belonged? What would you have done if you were Ethan Blackwood, removed from your rightful seat? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters. If this story of an epic comeback against prejudice resonated with you, and if you believe in justice being served, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't miss out on more captivating tales of defiance, resilience, and the power of karma delivered with a first-class ticket. Type "Justice Served" and your location in the comments.